A huge amount of us might be affected by mold. Mold in our house, previous mold exposure. How many of us lived in a moldy old flat or house when we were 19, just starting out? I think my rent was 26 quid a week. And the health issues from being exposed to mold, past or present, can start to mount up. So today, we dig into that.
Hi, I'm Tony. I'm an author, presenter at Sky Sports, and years ago I went to the jungle and got ill. Very ill. So this is my podcast adventure to find more energy. It's packed with biohacking, science, health tech, supplements, and some of the most well-known experts on the planet.
This is something I spent 4 months of my life doing with electrodes glued to my head so that you can do a lifetime worth of meditation.
Decide what you don't give a fuck about, which is something you don't care about.
Some of it gets quite out there.
I had some stem cells sent up to my house that I had stored, and then I injected myself with mannitol.
And we even hack hangovers.
Alcohol is poisonous. So is water and oxygen in the wrong dosage.
So that's my podcast, Zestology. Live life with energy, vitality, and motivation.
Hello again, Tony here. Just walking around London and clearly just about to walk past a building site as well. Oh joy, as I record this podcast. And today, looking at the issue of mold with Dr. Jill Crista. I am so thrilled and honoured to interview Dr. Jill, and I've been reading her book and loving it. She is possibly the world's foremost expert on mold in the world. There are others, Dr. Neil Nathan, Dr. Shoemaker. And her message is particularly down to earth, and it's all about mold. And if you live in a damp environment, and most of us do, I mean, I'm walking around London at the moment, and all right, at the moment it's pretty dry, but in the middle of winter, it rains every day, it feels like here. And as Dr. Jill says in this podcast, living in a damp environment inside has become almost normalised, and the health consequences are huge. You may not know it. If there's one podcast this month that I would love you to listen to all the way through, it is this one, because I really think that it could impact your health in a positive way. You'll hear my story as well with mold and why it is so important to me, and how discovering that I had previous mold exposure and my mycotoxin levels being far too high has led to a whole rethink in my health strategy. And I feel really good about that. So yeah, honoured to have Dr. Jill Crista on the podcast. And at the end of this podcast, I say to Jill, listen, I've got a couple of things that you might not know about, and I think they're great related to mold. Obviously, she did know about both of them, but she very graciously dealt with the fact that she knew a lot more about me on both these things. In fact, one of my things she'd even written a paper on. So that's coming up towards the end of the podcast. Here is Dr. Jill Crista on Zestology. Jill, it's lovely to talk to you. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's a real treat.
Well, thank you for coming on. My wife has been calling me the mold man for the last few months because I'm like a mold detective ever since I had these tests, which we can get into, and then I started reading your book, and it's just opened my eyes to a whole different world that I just didn't realize existed. But I think, I'm in London. It's a pretty damp place. I think this is a factor for a lot of people, isn't it?
I agree. I was actually just in London, and how, the entire UK has normalized damp. Like,
really?
It's just damp. It's, and that's not necessarily a term we even use in the US all that much. For us, it's like, it's mold, but, the idea of like, oh, it's just damp. That it's not impacting your health at all or something is something that we all deal with and tolerate. And that's a wrong thing to normalize. Just because it's common doesn't mean it's healthy. And there are so many people dealing with mold problems. I get emails from the UK all the time.
Do you?
Yeah. That's why I was so glad that, people that are training on becoming mold literate there, because it's just there's a huge vacuum of support and people who understand mold and what it's all about. Yeah.
There are. I mean, that is one of the most astonishing things to discover that this is an issue which impacts so many people, and yet there's so few people who have the knowledge able to practice and help people get better. Um,
Yes.
and yeah, it is pretty damp here in the UK, I've got to say.
Yeah, but I mean, you can have damp outside, but still manage the indoor environment and have it be a healthy environment. There's damp. The Portland and Seattle in the U.S. are damp areas too, and we just have to make sure we're paying attention to how we build buildings, and that's my whole mission is train more doctors, create studies that have people start to realize this is a health issue much bigger than simply allergies. At least now, even mast cell activation, which I know you talk about a lot, that's becoming kind of like okay, well, mold might be a contributor in this story because it's allergenic. But I'm trying to have the awareness to change the definition of mold-related illness, that it's more than spores. It's also mycotoxins. It's also mold chemicals. And that, for my patient population, is creating 75 to 80% of their symptoms not related to allergy. And so, yes, they can have allergy if they're exposed to the spores and the spore fragments, but there's this whole other story of mold-related illness that, contributes to a multi-system, multi-symptom condition. That's Dr. Shoemaker is really, I'm not Shoemaker trained, but, he was really the pioneer in determining that this could go anywhere in a person's body. It can cause almost any symptom. And that's why we're missing it, because then we blame it on other things.
Oh, it's crazy. So I just wanted to remind people of why I asked if you'd come on the podcast. And that is because I've been banging on about histamine intolerance for years, and lucky enough to have a very good practitioner, Caroline Sherlock, who and my symptoms having got so much better, I was never quite sure of the root cause, but I always knew I was extremely sensitive to mold and damp and just areas in general which didn't smell quite right. And I've got a very well-defined sense of smell. I'm a super sniffer.
Yeah.
And then
you could hire yourself out as an inspector,
Yeah. I mean, I just smell things that other people don't.
Yes.
And then I did the Great Plains mycotoxins test with Caroline, and it came up very high for a couple of mycotoxins, which she said are just linked to mold exposure. And that opened a whole door of discovery. And that really probably explains the histamine intolerance, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Mold is very, very, very commonly the in someone's story who has histamine intolerance, mast cell activation, those kinds of things. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So bearing all that in mind, could you sort of explain to my audience how you got into this and why? Because I've been my wife has been saying I'm the mold man, but you really are you really are Ms. Mold.
Miss Mold, yeah, queen, the maven of mold, yeah. Yeah, so I found myself in southern Wisconsin in the U.S., which is Lyme disease country. We're like third or fourth in the country for Lyme cases annually. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that's what I was moving into. So I was working with a lot of people with Lyme disease. And once I discovered, this is Lyme, I went and got specialized training in Lyme disease and how to manage it in a more holistic way, or more, not even holistic, in a way that actually addresses the fact that Lyme can be chronic, because that's not something that the infectious disease doctors would say. So I trained with ILADs in the US, and that basically gave me the tools to add on to my naturopathic tools. So then I really understood the pharmaceuticals, how long to have someone on them. And when you apply the principles of find and treat the cause, and you're treating it appropriately, you're not saying someone with chronic Lyme, it's all in their head. You actually treat their chronic infection. People tended to get better. But I had this subset of patients that just weren't getting better. And in one of those patients, they were remodeling their basement, and they found a ton of black mold in the basement. Oh. And the remodelers, or the inspector that we called in, estimated that it was probably a 10 to 12 year problem since they had remodeled it the last time and didn't address the water vapor barriers and things like that. So I was like, I wonder if this is like what's going on with his chronic Lyme, in air quotes for those that are listening, not watching. That when I went into the research, I kind of understood from naturopathic medicine, we're trained in environmental medicine. So I knew mold was a big deal. But I didn't really understand how neurologically toxic it was, how immunotoxic it was. until I got into the animal research. And that's when just a Pandora's box opened. I was like, oh, wow, that's not only what's going on with this guy who has chronic Lyme. I think that's what's going on with that person and that person and that person and that person. So when we got digging, we found in almost all of those, quote, chronic Lyme patients, they had mold either current or in their history. And that's the tricky thing about mold is you can be exposed in a 10 years ago, in a significant way. If you become colonized, you are now the moldy building. And so you can move into a non-moldy place, and about a coin flip of people need treatment beyond that. Just getting out of mold or damp doesn't necessarily get them better. They need treatment to turn that microbiome back into a healthy environment. And so that's how I got into this, is just being the research nerd that I am and just digging into PubMed like crazy and learning that what they were using with animals was a lot of the stuff that I used every day in practice in primary care as a naturopathic doctor. I'm like, oh, I know how to use turmeric. I know the dosing, so I could do my own translational research, looking at the animal studies and understanding how many milligrams per kilogram was kind of a lot and how much was kind of not a lot. And then I could apply that into treating my patients, and kind of developed a little bit of a protocol or a method, which I didn't really realize I was doing. As a naturopathic doctor, we're sort of taught a therapeutic order that has some wisdom to it and flexibility for individualizing to people. We're all different. And when we ended up with mold in my own home, it duped me. We moved into a relatively new home, and it was in the summer. We had the windows open, so there wasn't the immediate thing. And then slowly, as we closed up for the winter, we were getting sicker and sicker. And then it was one of those slow drip, 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 drip kind of things that eventually did expose itself that this was a water problem. And that's when I went, oh, this is mold. I'm not going into perimenopause. My kids aren't crazy, all these things. It was just like, oh, I know what to do about this. And I knew the remediator I wanted to work with. I knew the inspector to call. I knew the protocol to get us all on. And I thought, I need to write a book because everybody should know this. It's not rocket science. The symptoms get very scary and profound. But that doesn't mean it isn't treatable without profound things, so everyone has the control and the power to get better from this. And that's when I was like, okay, I guess I better teach this. And so there I went.
Yeah. And I remember reading that story in your book and thinking, oh my goodness, if the Queen of Mold can't spot it, that just shows how hard it is. I mean, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. And I was already, 10 years into working with mold. And that was, again, my lesson, like, oh, right. Mycotoxins don't smell. They don't have an odor. If you're smelling musty, damp, that kind of thing, that's still mold, but that's different chemicals from mold. But if it's all closed up behind building material, that doesn't necessarily leak out into the indoor space, but the mycotoxins can, because they're nanoparticles.
Yeah.
And they're the things that can make you wicked sick. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just so hard to figure out because everybody now is listening to this thinking, because the first step of your protocol is get out. If you've got a mold, get out, isn't it?
Yeah.
And everyone's thinking, hang on, how do I know? And that is not necessarily a particularly easy thing to figure out, is it?
It is not. And it's difficult even for doctors because it's multi-system, multi-symptom. And everybody, it's more the rule than the exception in a family that everyone will look mold sick differently.
Yes.
Because we all have different genetics. We all have different exposures, previous exposures maybe to mold. That's going to be the first person to get sick. We all have different nutritional status, people who are lower in glutathione or don't make a lot of glutathione because of the way that their genetics are, or a lot other detoxification things like the pathways through the liver. If you're low on your essential fats in your body, that makes you more susceptible. If you're low on bioflavonoids, that makes you more susceptible. Tricky thing with histamine intolerance, and this is how mold is a Jedi, it will make you more sensitive to the very things that you need to combat it, like sunshine, like fruits and vegetables, the strawberries, the spinaches, all of those things that we should be getting into our body so that we can help get that mold out and the mycotoxins out, you start to become sensitive to it. It's just wily.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's why I put together my questionnaire, because I was having that trouble in clinic, and I'm a trained doctor and I was working with chronic Lyme patients. I'm like, I kind of know some stuff and this is even hard for me to figure out. So that's where I put together the questionnaire, and I modeled it after one of my heroes, Dr. Horowitz, who's a Lyme god. He's in the Lyme disease world. And he put together a questionnaire that's been scientifically validated. And it's got 3 categories. So it kind of gives different weights to different symptoms. So it gives us a little more surety that if the arrows are pointing toward mold, it's probably mold. So if anybody wants that questionnaire, it's free off my website. We've refined it, and we're going to be starting a research study on the questionnaire to try to elucidate what kinds of molds create what kinds of symptoms, and try to get some published information.
Right. So, and that's,
stay tuned.
I mean, it's mad, isn't it? But actually, you can do things like I bought a damp meter for the walls, and I bought a Amazon Air quality monitor, which are both quite interesting, but they don't really give you that much useful information.
Right.
So actually a questionnaire is probably more helpful.
Yeah, it tells you symptoms, and it's helpful-ish. In other words, there's 3 categories where it's either your results say, nope, not mold. And then there's a middle section, it's possibly mold. And then there's a top section, which is it's probably mold based on what I've learned, in my years of experience. And we've tested this now on different doctors, because each doctor sees sort of a different group of patients. People are attracted to the doctors that work for them. Yeah. So each of us are going to see a different subset. So I've tested this out with other doctors, and they've tested on their patients. And so it is giving us some confidence that if it says probable mold, you need to do some investigation and look at your environment. Mm-hmm.
And then there's the VOC eyesight test as well. Do you think that's a good idea as well?
Yeah, I like that. VCS is
VCS,
visual contrast sensitivity. I like to use the one on vcstest.com. The reason I love it is that it forces you to calibrate your whole machine first before you get going. Since it's a visual test, that's pretty important. And I do like that test. It's a very affordable test, like $15. You can get an annual membership that gives you like 30 tries, so that if you are in a situation where do you call it a solicitor, right? Your insurance company, I don't know. Anyway, if you're being given the chance to get to another environment while they remediate, you can test your VCS to see if that next place is better or worse for you than the place you were in.
No way.
Because a lot of these
that's
places,
accurate. Your eyesight is affected to that
quite quickly.
Degree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are other factors that can make that worse. If you're having if you're a smoker, that's a little harder, because that does affect your VCS as well, your contrast that you can see with your vision. If you're, undergoing Lyme treatment and undergoing a Herxheimer reaction, that can make it worse. So there's some fine tuning, but in the VCS test, they explain those kinds of things. Like, these are the categories where you're having trouble seeing contrast. These point toward biotoxin related things, or nutrition, or, those kinds of things. Yeah. So I do find it and that's not me, that's the military. That's what the military uses. That's why Dr. Shoemaker found it, or, has brought it into use, is that they use it for monitoring soldiers and their biotoxin exposure in warfare.
Wow. These mycotoxins, some of them are carcinogens, classed as carcinogens. Interrupting this podcast for one moment to let you know about my podcast partner, and today it is BiOptimizers. Summer or any holiday season is such a delightful time, isn't it? But it's not summer anymore. The vacation season is winding down, and it is time to get back on track with our health. And if you've struggled to return to your health routine, I have what I think is a valuable lesson to share, and that is focus on the big stuff. So healthy eating, exercise, and the thing that works more than anything else. And we've seen it time again on this podcast. Ultimately, you can have all the fancy biohacks and supplements in the world. But if you've had only 5 hours sleep instead of 7 hours sleep is not going to work. Sleep is so important, and drinking more than 2 servings of alcohol, for example, per day for men, and more than 1 serving per day for women can decrease sleep quality by 39.2%. That's according to the Sleep Foundation. And one of the things you can do to help with your sleep is take good supplements like Magnesium Breakthrough. So taking a supplement to help with your sleep. Magnesium Breakthrough contains all 7 forms of magnesium designed to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. And the sleep benefits are truly remarkable. Once your sleep is optimized, you'll find it much easier to tackle all the other major aspects of your health. You can visit magbreakthrough.com/zestology and enter the code Zestology10 for 10% off any order. That is only available at magbreakthrough.com/zestology. And in fact, I've just been to look at that page, and there are some deals which are better than 10% on there as well if you buy more than 1 bottle at once. You can use the Zestology10 code in the UK on the BiOptimizers site as well. That is bioptimizers.co.uk, and whisper it quietly, that code will work on any BiOptimizers product. They even have another product called Sleep Breakthrough. So it's all about sleep this month as we get back into our routine. magbreakthrough.com/zestology. Enter the code Zestology10 for 10% off any order. Now, back to the show. On the eyesight, I've certainly noticed that sometimes my eyesight just feels better than others. I don't think that's because I'm a 40-something man. I think it's simply because sometimes I don't know what's going on in my body, but it's the sort of mycotoxin levels are high. Do you think that's plausible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if it weren't, why would the military use a visual test?
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, that's I've seen that be related to taurine levels, because taurine is an amino acid we use for making bile, which is how we get a lot of these mycotoxins out. But taurine also makes up the retina of the eye. It's one of the amino acids that helps build the retina. And also our visual processing could get thrown off. And that's related to, like I was saying, like good fats like fish oil and bioflavonoids. So when your body is really under a high demand of mycotoxins, or if you're dumping mycotoxins, because we can accumulate them. So if you're going through like a detox or a weight loss or something like that, your body might start dumping these, and you'll use up a lot of those nutrients to clean out the toxin. Right. And then your eyes get kind of second dibs on those nutrients.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny you say that, actually, because one of the things I've heard said about when you do some of these mycotoxins tests, sometimes it can be actually hard to find the mold in the body. And you actually almost want to provoke a bit of a reaction so the test can,
Yeah. And I have identical twins, and I have a friend who has identical twins, and they had mold in their house. So I've done a ton of testing on split sample testing, meaning I sent the same sample to the different labs and the different ways of testing for mycotoxins all in the same day. And I have genetically identical people to experiment on that I used to when they lived at home. And now they don't, so I can't play with them. But
you have to pay them to come back now. It's not quite as cost effective.
So when I was doing these testings, I found that when we use the mass spec method, which is what Great Plains and Vibrant use, if we give glutathione, we might be falsely lowering some of those mycotoxins. So, and then Dr. Joseph Brewer did a study on sauna, and he found that he did a pre and post sauna with a patient. So they took the urine mycotoxins from real time before, which is a different method. That's ELISA method. Before the sauna, had her do a sauna. I think it was like 25 minutes at 125 or something like that. And then collected urine for the next 6 hours and then sent that in. And he found that her mycotoxins went up 10-fold from that single sauna. So if we're provoking, we have to be really careful that if we're provoking with anything, we collect for that next 6 hours, because what that taught me is there's going to be a peak and then a trough. So if you don't test till the next day, you're going to be testing the lowest level, the trough level, they say in lab medicine. So we want to be catching, if it's there. So if somebody is a really poor excretor. We can tell because they're sensitive to the world,
Well,
which is
there you go.
histamine.
Sounds,
You know?
that sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so those are going to be people that we may need to provoke to even see anything because their body goes into accumulation mode. Like, I can't deal with anything coming in, so I'm just going to store this and then deal with it later. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that because when I did the mycotoxins test, Caroline had sent me or sort of booked me the test, and it sort of sat there for ages. And I felt more ill than I felt in years when I did the test. And I think, at the time I was like, is it COVID? But I actually think I was having a massive Herx sort of reaction. There was some sort of dump going on, as you say. And that's why the levels came up high. So although I didn't feel good at the time, it was probably a good thing that I was going through that because I was actually able to see what was going on.
Mm-hmm. And we typically see more mycotoxins coming out in the urine as we start treating someone. It's like they lay down in sedimentary layers or something like that. Like you got to peel off the first one and then you see. So there's easy ones to get rid of, like MPA comes off, which is not technically a mycotoxin, but it comes off easy because it's water soluble. We might see aflatoxin move away kind of quickly because it's a simple molecule. But then the more complex molecules like zearalenone, that's a harder one to detoxify because it's very complex.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So on that theme, your first bit of advice is get out if you think there might be mold. And then getting rid of the mold exposure is not quite as simple. But as you said, some aspects of mold and mycotoxins might be simpler than others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the general method or approach that I use is kind of 5 steps. The first one is avoidance. So not only getting away from the mold or remediating or whatever you need to do, but also what are your habits, hobbies, things like that might be inducing more fungal burden. Because basically what's happening with that mycotoxin is it's sending a message to the microbiome of your body and your sinuses, on your skin, and your gut, that mold is trying to move in. Fungus family is trying to win the ever present balancing act that's going on with the microbes in your body. We have normal bacteria, we have normal fungus, we have normal viruses that are just in there having their normal, there's a commensal state usually. But when you're exposed to these mycotoxins, it's sending a toxic message, and they're made by the mold on purpose to harm another living thing. We're not really the target, but because we're a little bigger than the mold wants to take on. So usually what it's trying to do is compete out other fungi, other bacteria in that environment. And it's very energetically expensive for them to make these mycotoxins. So if they're there, if you find one in your urine test, there were others in the environment because that means that there was a competitive thing going on or a war going on in your space. And that's why when we peel off, we often find more. And a lot of people go, oh no, I'm getting worse. And I'm like, no, it's okay. We expect this. This is how this works. Yeah. So when you can get away, you want to also get rid of things that are like, if you're a brewmaster, if some of those things are going to increase fungi. If you're a mushroomer or something like that, just take a hiatus from that for a little while so that your body can stop getting the message that, there's more fungus, there's more fungus. Even the proteins on mushrooms can be very provoking to our immune systems. If the immune system's already worn out, that can be sending the wrong message. Like in cancer care, we use beta-glucans, we use mushrooms, medicinal mushrooms. What that's trying to do is actually provoke the immune system to say, hey, it's not really nourishing. I mean, mushrooms are nourishing, but they're also a little bit provoking to the immune system. So for a little while, we just take away anything in the fungal family that's in the diet, maybe blue cheese, maybe take a hiatus from those kinds of things, fermented foods, which, histamine sensitive people figured out a long time ago. Yeah. That, oh, wow, that doesn't make me feel good. And the reason is that there are those fungal elements that are sending the message and reinforcing that fungus is winning in this system. And we don't want it to win. We want it to be in balance. And so second step is fundamentals. That's sort of like, biohacking. That now I could have just called that biohacking, clean diet, get to bed on time, move your body, get outside, clean water, clean air, those kinds of things. And then third would be protecting the body from more damage. Fourth is repairing. So certain things that help to protect the organs of detoxification, protect your brain, things that we kind of like to have healthy. And then repair is more in the things of beefing up the immune system, repairing any tissue damage from the spores, the mast cells that they induced, and then the mycotoxins. And the fifth is fight, meaning let's fight back the fungal burden in the body, and then that can get the commensal species back in. And a big one with the fight, I moved to that fight phase as quickly as possible with someone with histamine intolerance, because I know that there's a move that the fungus makes on the surface, which is it goes from kind of evading the immune system to invading your tissues. So you can think of it like a root made it down through the layer, so to speak. That's when mast cells get recruited big time. Like that's the moment. And so that's when I know, like a lot of people with histamine intolerance, they have a combination of a fungal presence that is trying really hard to be infective. And a lot of them also are hosting parasites. So when we can do those two, when we're in the fight mode, if we're addressing things that address both of those, then, things can calm down. The mast cells don't have to be recruited over and over and over again. They're not evil, although it can feel that way when you feel like your body is working against you, but the mast cells are trying to protect you from something. They wouldn't be getting recruited for nothing. The body is incredibly wise. So if we can take down those burdens, that can really help the mast cells chill out.
Yeah. I think I'm going to be embarking on that phase fairly shortly with Caroline.
Nice.
And as you say, it's just frustrating, isn't it? Because some people react so differently to others.
Yes.
And so thankfully, my family are very supportive of the fact I'm extremely sensitive to everything. But it must be quite frustrating if you're around people who aren't so understanding.
Yes. Yeah. People just need to know it's natural to have differences, and you aren't crazy. These are real responses. If you're seeing a practitioner that doesn't understand or is, kind of disregarding your symptoms, find a new practitioner because it's just not worth the personal, that can get kind of hard on the emotions and your own inner fight. I think that's the biggest part of the fight phase, is finding it first in yourself to keep fighting for yourself. That's so important. And I have to say too, a lot of people they think of the fight phase as just sort of like taking things, swallowing things. But because the sinuses are our first interface, there is study after study that shows that rhinosinusitis, so sinusitis plus mold exposure, is a predictive factor of having worse outcomes from other things like asthma. So it starts in the nose. So if you're not addressing the sinus colonization, you're going to continue to seed your gut over and over and over again. And I learned this again from Dr. Brewer. When there was a study in 2013, and it showed everybody has fungus in our sinuses. So it isn't the mere presence of the fungus. It's that not everybody has fungus making mycotoxins.
Right.
So they found mycotoxins in the sick people's nasal washings, lung washings. I mean, they did a whole wonderful assessment. They didn't find them in the healthy people. And that's when I just was like, oh my goodness, this is colonization. I'm not addressing the sinuses. When I started addressing the sinuses, people got better so much faster.
Right.
That's a huge part.
Yeah, I read that in your book as well. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that leads me on to one of the final things I wanted to say, which is I think I might have a couple of things that you might not have heard of, but you might have.
Okay.
But let's see. So the first thing, I've tried a lot of different, I had a sinus infection a few months ago and I've never really had one before. And I tried all sorts of things, silver spray and X-Lear and essential oil spray and all sorts of things. Nothing really worked that well. And then I bought this little 10-pound device that sort of sticks 2 prongs of red light up the nose.
Oh yeah, the BioNet.
It's so good.
Yeah.
So you do know about it, but
yes.
You think it's good, yeah?
Yes, it's wonderful. And it really reduces the allergic type reactions in the area. I have a study that just got published in a peer-reviewed journal, which I'm very proud of getting that baby.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's a case where I talk about the fact that, that was kind of the clinker for him, is when he switched to the red light device.
Oh, right. Great.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I'm going to go and look that out. Fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So not only you did know about that, you've actually written a study about it. So that's great. Yeah. Okay. Well, the other one is that I've always found with the histamine intolerance, I've found it quite hard to tolerate omega-3s. And then I've started on SPM, specialized pro-resolving mediators. And I've had incredibly good fortune with that, and it seems to have resolved a lot of the inflammation in my gut, which I wasn't really expecting. But my goodness, I feel different since taking them.
Yes, wonderful. Yeah, that's like a cheat code, for a histamine tolerant person. You can just basically take the most anti-inflammatory aspects of the fish oil and use that. So yeah, SPMs, resolvents, they're known as different things, but they're wonderful.
Have you found that they're helpful with mold as well, or?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. And also pandas pans. I write about them in my Pandas and Pans book because they're so important they get through the blood-brain barrier faster. They can do more on chilling out the microglia in the brain, which is our resident immune cells in the brain. But people have to be careful. Not all labels are accurate. So make sure in the US right now, the companies that I'm using are practitioner type companies, but companies have picked up on the fact that people want these. And so they're basically just taking their regular fish oil and relabeling it as high SPM. So be careful and watch that it's an actual, that you're getting those aspects.
I will. Yeah. And actually the only reason I felt like I could really tell is that when I opened the bottle up, it smells so different to a normal bottle of omega-3 fish oil. I mean, it smells sort of sweet. It's a beautiful smell.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Wow.
Really good. Yeah. So, okay. I didn't tell you anything that you didn't already know, but
that doesn't mean anything. But you told people that were listening stuff they didn't know, and that's who this is for. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So, Jill, the final questions I always ask is, what is one book that you would recommend? And obviously, I've mentioned your book, and I'm going to mention that in the show notes as well, because I've loved that. But one book you would recommend, and one tip for living with more energy.
I love the book, and it's a little more esoteric, and it's something that I always joke to the author that he should be on Oprah. It's called The Serpent and the Butterfly.
Oh, wow.
And I just love that book because it really talks about the approach of getting better from a chronic illness. It's by Dr. Ben Reeves, and it's really a lovely book. It's my latest favorite.
Okay, good. Well, I will look that out. And then what about one tip for living with more energy and vitality?
Get outside every day, no excuses, get outside. We are solar powered, and we must be in the sun. So I know I'm not saying anything different than you. I've been listening to your podcast, and
thank you.
You're right on that. So yeah.
But I mean, the ones that work really well, the sort of, the biohacks that are best, they're the ones that are fairly basic anyway. We just sort of forget about it sometimes, don't we? Yeah,
we do. Yeah, we've sort of been programmed to not rely on the things that are the most profound for us.
Well, Jill, thank you. It's so nice to chat to you. And where can people find out more about you and your book, of course?
Yes, they can find me at drcrista.com. That's drcrista.com. And all my information is there. The questionnaire is there. Lots of handouts, things that if you're curious what you can use in your nose. Then I have
I've checked it out already. I've made copious notes, and your book is one of my most annotated books that I've ever read on the Kindle as well.
Oh, I love it. I love it. That's great. Yeah. Wonderful. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you.
Oh, really good to talk to you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Jill. Thank you for listening to Zestology. Remember, this podcast is brought to you by Magnesium Breakthrough, my friends at BiOptimizers. And if you go to magbreakthrough.com/Zestology and use the code Zestology10, you can get 10% off on all BiOptimizers products, not just that one. In fact, at that page, magbreakthrough.com/Zestology, you can get up to over 30% off. There are loads of discounts and deals. So go to magbreakthrough.com/Zestology if you are someone who's been exposed to mold. In fact, magnesium is particularly important. And it's definitely part of my daily routine. It's getting a bit windy here where I am, so I'm going to say goodbye now. Thank you for listening to this podcast. I'll be back with a midweek Zespresso later in the week, so see you then. It's only a couple of minutes. You can have it over an espresso and just take a moment out of your day to listen to that. And as always, thank you for listening. Oh, and my Instagram's getting a lot of love at the moment. Love from me. I mean, maybe other people as well, but I'm putting more love into my Instagram at the moment. More videos, more content, and some of these podcasts, like this one, are being turned into video content as well. So if you want to see a bit of Dr. Jill Crista, go to Instagram. It's @Tony Wrighton. Thanks, that's it. Plug over. Bye.